Welcome to our Term 2 review quick tutorial for eukaryotic cell structures. So in this video, we're going to be talking about only eukaryotic cell structures. Specifically, the term that we're going to use is organelles. So we're going to talk about cellular organelles. There are only 10 that we're going to focus on because there are only 10 big ticket items that you need to know for the Term 2 test. So our 10, we're going to go ahead and dive in with our first three, but our first three that we're going to talk about are cellular structures that are actually found in all cells, whether it's a prokaryote or a eukaryote. And if you remember from our previous lecture that prokaryotic cells, the only example would be bacteria, and they don't have any membrane-bound organelles. So the first one that we're going to talk about is something called cytoplasm. So our first organelle, which isn't really an organelle, but it's an important cellular structure or has an important cellular presence, is something called cytoplasm. And we're not going to draw a picture for cytoplasm because there really isn't a picture to draw here, because cytoplasm is just the liquid filling that organelles float in. So pretty simple. So cytoplasm is just a liquid solution that fills the inside of the cell that basically provides a medium for the other organelles to float around in. So cytoplasm is pretty simple, but it's important to note that cytoplasm is found in all cells. So I'm going to go ahead and put a star next to that, and you should do the same thing on your paper. For our next one, the next one that we are going to talk about, number 2, is something called ribosomes. Now ribosomes, just like our cytoplasm, ribosomes are found in all cells. And because ribosomes are found in all cells, whether they're prokaryotes or eukaryotes, we're going to go ahead and draw a star next to it so we remember that in our notes. Now the important thing about ribosomes when we draw a picture of them, ribosomes are just represented by these circular dots that are floating around inside of the cytoplasm, and sometimes they're found attached to something called endoplasmic reticulum, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually get to our ER. Now ribosomes only have one job. They are the site of protein synthesis. And all that means is that this is where we make protein. So protein synthesis, this word synthesis means to make. So if I need a protein, proteins can only be made here at these little dots inside the cell. And we know proteins are important because they're one of your 4 macromolecules of life. All right, our next organelle that you're responsible for knowing is something called the cell membrane. Now the cell membrane, just like our cytoplasm and just like our ribosomes, are found in all cells. They are the barrier that surrounds all cell types, whether they're prokaryotic or eukaryotic, whether they're an animal cell or a plant cell. And the important thing to know about cell membranes is that a cell membrane is made up of something called phospholipids. And later on in a next set of in another video tutorial that we're going to have, it's only going to focus specifically on the cell membrane and surface area to volume ratio. So for right now, all I'm going to tell you is that the cell membrane is a barrier that maintains homeostasis for the cell. And all that means is that it controls what can enter and leave. So another way of thinking about it, we can say that the cell membrane is the bouncer of the cell, just like you have a bouncer at a club that can control what can enter and leave. And if you remember, the cell membrane has a number of different names, and we're going to talk more specifically about that later. The cell membrane can be called also the plasma membrane, the phospholipid bilayer, as well as the fluid mosaic model. All right, now that we have our first 3 out of the way, we have 7 more to go. I put those first 3 together because all of those things are found in all cells. So now what we're going to be talking about are only cellular organelles that are found in eukaryotic cells. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in with number 4. Number 4 is going to be called a cell wall. And although cell walls can be found in prokaryotes, we want to focus on the cell wall specifically because it's a good way to remember the difference between plant and animal cells. So this provides structure and support. And I want to emphasize that this structure and support is found in plants and fungus. It is never found in an animal cell or around an animal cell, and that's an important distinction. So you won't see these particular structures in your cells, for instance. All right, moving on to our next organelle. Our next organelle is the nucleus. This is an important one. The nucleus is only found in eukaryotes, and the nucleus generally looks like a big old ball like this. So it tends to be circular, sometimes it's colored in, it tends to be dense, and it tends to be found somewhere near the middle of the cell. And the nucleus is important because this is the brain of the cell. And the reason why we call it the brain of the cell is because it contains DNA. And we know that DNA controls all of the cellular activity. But again, the nucleus is only found in eukaryotic cells because it is membrane bound. It's surrounded by something called a nuclear envelope. So this is the brain of my cell, and it is called the nucleus. Our next cellular organelle that you need to be responsible for is something called endoplasmic reticulum. And endoplasmic reticulum is interesting because there's actually two types. And the two types are smooth, ER, and there's also rough, ER. Now, regardless of whether we're talking about smooth or rough ER, we're just going to say that the job of the endoplasmic reticulum is that basically it functions as the roads of the cell. And the reason why we say it's the roads of the cell is because it helps to transport proteins and lipids around the cell. And I'm going to quickly draw a picture of this because endoplasmic reticulum is sometimes hard to figure out where it is if you don't understand what it's attached to. So endoplasmic reticulum is always going to be attached to the nucleus of the cell. So I'm going to go ahead and draw on a structure that represents my nucleus. So if this is my nucleus here, so here's my circular structure. So I'm going to go ahead and label this my nucleus. Okay, my nucleus is going to have a membrane that comes off of it that looks something like this. And this membrane that comes off is going to be attached to the nucleus. So it's important to remember that. So here's my ER, and because this doesn't have anything embedded on it, this is an example of my smooth ER. But then there's another type of ER that comes off of this, and it's a little bit further away from the nucleus, but it's attached to the smooth. And my next set of structures that come off, it's going to look like this. So it still looks similar in terms of this set of tubes, but these tubes are going to have dots on them. And these little dots are going to be our ribosomes. And because it has dots, if you were to physically run your hand over, if it was large enough for you to do that, it would actually, you would feel those little ridges or those bumps. And because you can feel them, we're going to say that this is our rough ER. But collectively, you just need to know that this is the road of the cell and it helps to transport proteins as well as lipids. All right, now that we've talked about our endoplasmic reticulum and the difference between the two types, smooth and rough, let's go ahead and dive into our next organelle for number 7. Our 7th organelle that you need to know is something called the Golgi body. The Golgi body is sometimes referred to as the Golgi apparatus. And the Golgi body is what we commonly refer to as the post office of the cell. That means that it's used to basically package and deliver materials. Now, a lot of people confuse the Golgi body with the endoplasmic reticulum because they think visually they look similar. But the important thing to remember about the Golgi body is that it's never attached to the nucleus like my endoplasmic reticulum is. Because remember, the endoplasmic reticulum comes off the nucleus and looks like a squiggly bunch of lines, but it's still attached to it. My Golgi body, however, looks like a stack of pancakes, individual pancakes, and it's usually a stack of about 6. So here's my Golgi, and you want to draw a similar thing on your paper. So here's my Golgi. So it's a stack of pancakes that works like a post office. And again, this guy is never attached to the nucleus. And number 8 on our list is something called the lysosome. And our lysosome is pretty simple. Our lysosome is only found in animal cells. And our lysosome is the garbage can of the cell. And the reason why we say it's the garbage can of the cell is because anything that needs to be broken down or recycled, or anything that we need to get rid of, is going to be taken to the lysosome, and that's where it's going to be broken down so it's no longer taking up space or causing any trouble inside the cell. But it's important to note, and I'm going to go ahead and put an asterisk next to this guy, that my lysosome is only found in animal cells, because that might be a question that you'll see on your assessment. So it's never found in plant cells. For number 9, we're going to be talking about, we're going to start out with our mitochondria first. So our mitochondria is important because this is the power plant of the cell, because this is where we're making our ATP, which is our energy for the cell. It's the site of cell respiration. And we're going to talk about cellular respiration a little later on, even though you guys should be experts at this point because we just finished up this particular unit. Our mitochondria has a very distinct shape. So if we're looking at our mitochondria, it's shaped like a kidney bean. But the inside layer of my mitochondria actually looks like a maze. It has a bunch of squiggly lines to increase surface area. Our very last organelle that you're responsible for knowing is organelle number 10. So for organelle number 10, our very last one, we're dealing with chloroplast. Chloroplast is a special organelle because, like lysosomes, it's only found in one type of cell. So lysosomes are only found in animal cells. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells. So these are our solar panels. And the reason why we call them our solar panels is because they collect energy from the sun, because chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. So it's where photosynthesis takes place. And our chloroplasts are pretty easy to recognize because our chloroplasts look like a circle. So it's a double membrane structure that has stacks of cookies or stacks of pancakes inside of them, however you want to describe them. Some people also refer to them as stacks of hockey pucks. It's whatever you think you see. So they're easy to distinguish from one another. All right, now that we've talked about the 10 important organelles, go ahead and use your notes to help you answer the review questions on your day sheet. And again, if you have any questions, please make sure you stop me so that we can discuss it because you will see this information on your Term 2 assessment. Thanks, guys.